Hi, I'm Josh from Ocker. We're standing here today at Granard Wetlands, which is a long-term project we've been doing over the last decade, really, in another number of iterations, and it has just wound up here with a offset with Energex, which was a partnership where we were rehabilitating the land here to get it back to its natural state. So before we started rehabilitating here, Granard Wetlands was very much a degraded landscape. It was a tip in the 1974 floods, so a lot of debris and construction material was dumped here, a lot of asbestos and so forth. That was dumped here. It was also somewhat of just a parkland. It's on a floodplain, so there was a creek running through. There was just mown grass, and there was also heavy infestations of what we call woody weeds, which are tree species that are invasive and damaging to ecosystems, and the ecosystem was extremely choked by coral trees, Chinese elms, and broadleaf pepper. So Granard Wetlands is actually, in its name, it's an ephemeral wetland. What was probably here originally was paperbark, Melaleuca quinquenervia, and she oak, Casuarina glauca ecosystem. And if you have seen sort of low-lying areas with poor drainage or slow drainage, you'll see those types of areas with paperbark forest. And so we're trying to reconstruct that ecosystem with those dominant top-tier canopy species, she oak and paperbark, and also blue gum. The problems with trying to restore wetlands are quite difficult. Main reasons is that you've got extremely high weed growth rates, so whenever you plant native species into this area, you've got extremely high growth rates of weeds that will choke out or outcompete the natives that you plant. Another major problem is just the flooding. So stuff that you do plant is at risk of getting inundated. So, and depending on the severity of the flooding, that can completely destroy a planting. Another major problem is that you can't necessarily use weed suppressants. So, because we would use wood chip to suppress weed and plant into the wood chip, little keyholes into the wood chip, we'd plant our natives, and that would allow the natives to grow without the competition from weeds. In this situation, in this context with the flooding, we're not able to use mulch because it's a contaminant and it will get washed away into the waterways and contaminate. We also couldn't use netting over the mulch, which is like a netting that holds the mulch in place, because that was also a risk of being washed away in this highly volatile environment. So we weren't allowed to use that either. That was some of the complexities of this site. So basically you've got a situation where in summer you have growth rates of weeds where they can grow up to 1 meter in a week, and it's really that fast. So you've got to keep coming back and treating it, and it can be very difficult to keep up with it. It's very expensive. So those are the main complexities here, environmentally, I guess, but there's also other complexities around just being in a degraded area. So being in an industrial area, you have contaminants in the ground. We found contaminants here that held up works for a number of years. We have contaminants in the soil, so there was areas of the site where we couldn't actually dig into the ground, so we had to come up with different solutions as to how to regenerate that land without actually disturbing the substrate, the existing substrate. Also very expensive and difficult and challenging. You have to be sensitive to these types of things. We've also got Bunnings here, and you know, there's a lot of contaminants coming in from the road, from the highway. We've got an easement here which is a power line easement, and that means that we can't, we've got height restrictions on the vegetation and directly underneath the power lines. So there's a whole host of factors that make it complex here, but probably the biggest thing is the contaminant lands, and the other large problem was not being able to use weed suppressant. So it makes it very challenging to establish your native ecosystems without having that baseline of structural sort of stability to a restoration project of suppressing weeds, because it's really the weeds, especially invasive grasses, that are the things that will destroy your plantings in their early phases. So in nature, in a normal setting, you know, there'll be a seed bank of native species, and if you go to a forest area or a natural area, there'll be a very healthy seed bank of natives. And so when you come to a situation here where it's been historically cleared, would have been logged initially, the ecosystem that would have been here has lost its regenerative capacity. So what I mean by that is it's not able to propel or propagate itself. It's not able to bring itself back to its original state, let alone propagate or perpetuate its health through time. So what we need to do then is, in this situation, is we need to reconstruct the ecosystem. So what we have to do there when we're reconstructing an ecosystem, in a situation like this, highly degraded landscape, no seed bank, we have to use methods like planting. We plant tube stock, and tube stock is just basically stock that's been propagated in a nursery, a native nursery. This situation means that there's a lot of labour involved, a lot of costs, and it also means when you plant, you're planting stock that's very vulnerable. So in the initial phases, for say the first 3, 6, 9 months, the stock's very vulnerable before they become established. So there's a lot of maintenance involved because there'll be weed that recruits and outcompetes. Another reason it's so vulnerable is because in nature, when a seed germinates in a normal setting, there's a root system established, quite a large root system established before the seed even germinates. So before the seed even shoots up its first shoot, there's already quite a substantial root system. So when you put in tube stock, conversely, when you put in tube stock, there might be a tube stock with a stem so high it might have quite a bit of foliage, and it only has a root ball or root system this big, so it's top heavy. Another reason why it's so vulnerable, it takes a long time for that root system to establish. Yeah. So okay, so let's go see some of the work we've done and how some of these plantings are going, and we can talk a bit about that. Okay.